What's the matter? Oh my God. Something has happened. Can you talk? You can't talk. All right, I'm calling 911.
Stroke, a silent killer, striking without warning, leaving devastating consequences. Every year, about 15 million people worldwide suffer a stroke, with 5 million left permanently disabled. For those affected, stroke can be life-shattering. Loss of mobility, speech, and independence. The impact is immeasurable. Stroke is a leading cause of death and disability worldwide. So what is a stroke? Simply put, it's when the blood supply to the brain is interrupted, either due to a blockage or a burst blood vessel. High blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, and physical inactivity increase your risk. Reducing the risk of stroke requires awareness, action, and commitment. Our guests will discuss the most effective strategies for preventing stroke and share insights on living with the risk. Stay tuned for our live discussion.
Well, thanks, Ibrahim, for that package and joining us for the conversation now. We have joining us all the way from Maiduguri, Dr. Musa Joseph Gadzama. He's a consultant neurologist at the University of Maiduguri Teaching Hospital. Many thanks, Dr. Musa Joseph Gadzama.
Thank you very much, and thank you, viewers, for having me this morning.
All right, Doctor, we'll get back to you. We also have with us for the conversation Dr. Christopher Otabo, orthopedic surgeon and MD Alliance Hospital. Many thanks for joining us, Doctor. It's a pleasure to have you again.
Thank you for having me.
Also from Kano is Dr. Mansour Ramalan. Is the consultant physician, diabetologist, and endocrinologist, and first Vice President, Diabetes Association of Nigeria, and Vice President, Association of Clinical Endocrinologists of Nigeria. He is also the chairman of Non-Communicable Diseases Committee of the Nigerian Medical Association. Dr. Ramalan, you are welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Nigeria.
Thank you very much. Good morning, viewers.
Dr. Ramalan, let's just start with you. Let's just stay with you and tell us, what do you understand when we talk about stroke? What exactly is stroke? Tell us from your experience, your research, or treating with a stroke patient. What is stroke?
Good morning, viewers. You did a very wonderful report on giving an overview of what stroke is. Stroke is actually simply a situation where the brain is unable to receive sufficient blood supply, either as a result of blockage from the blood supply to the brain, or a rupture of the blood vessel, which is, of course, one of the causes. And sometimes there are other conditions that may predispose individuals to developing stroke. But by and large, for good reasons, we know that there are certain factors that predispose individuals to developing stroke, which you highlighted some in the report you gave before we started discussing this issue. And of course, number one risk factor for stroke is hypertension. And apart from hypertension, we have things like diabetes and overweight or obesity. We have lifestyle factors like cigarette smoking, alcohol intake, and so on. So looking back to discuss what we can do as individuals, community, and healthcare practitioners is geared towards putting efforts to reduce these risk factors.
Dr. Ramalan, we'll come back to you later. Oh.
That 15
We'll come back to you later.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
You're done now. All right, we'll get back to you later. Let's just come back to the studio where we have Dr. Otabo. Doctor, once again, we want to ask, give us what are the primary risk factors of stroke, especially here in Nigeria?
Thank you once again for having me. Good morning, viewers. In Nigeria, the top on the list, risk factors for stroke is uncontrolled hypertension. Not hypertension, uncontrolled hypertension, with the word uncontrolled underlined. Yeah, that accounts for about 80%, maybe between 60 and 80% of the stroke incidents that we have in Nigeria. Then that also is followed by uncontrolled diabetes. And then before we talk about high cholesterol, that's dyslipidemia, where the cholesterol accumulates in the blood and narrows the blood vessel until it gets to a critical level where it is blocked, and that can lead to stroke. So these three are by and large the highest risk factors for stroke in this environment. Yes.
All right. In the definition, from what Dr. Ramalan said and then what the background said, talks about when there's a blockage in the flow of blood to the brain. For a layman who is not a medical doctor and doesn't have any experience with medical practice, besides hypertension, which you've mentioned, which is a risk factor, what could cause that? I mean, it's in the brain. So why would there be a blockage?
Okay, so the way the body functions, the blood vessels, the brain is very rich with blood vessels and blood supply. It takes so much volumes per minute, and the blood supplies nutrients and oxygen to the brain, and the vessels are in a mesh form. So if there's anywhere where there's a narrowing, or if blood clot forms within or any solid is formed within the blood vessel, then the blood vessel can block the blood vessel when it gets to a bend or a smaller caliber vessel. From that point forward, that part of the brain that the blood supplies will not get blood supply, and then that leads to dysfunction. No, there are two basic forms of stroke. We have the ischemic stroke, which we have just described, when there's blockage of the blood vessel. Then the second one is the hemorrhagic stroke, in which the blood vessel simply ruptures, and there are factors that causes that rupture. Whether hypertension can cause both, because consistent high blood pressure without control affects the nature of the blood vessel. Now, the blood vessel is supposed to be elastic. Whenever blood is coming with pressure, it's supposed to expand. When the blood passes, it comes back.
Contract.
So that elasticity is lost with persistent hypertension. The blood vessel become hardened, so it doesn't yield easily. So with some force, instead of yielding, it cracks, and then the blood comes out from the vessel. And once the blood is extravasated, then there will be no supply to the part of the brain that the blood vessel is supposed to be supplying. The same thing with diabetes. It alters the structure of the blood vessel, and it also can cause some roughness within the interior of the blood vessel, and that can lead to blood clots formation, because the blood cells and the content are supposed to be flowing in a very smooth stream without turbulence. But when that smooth stream is lost, then it can predispose to blood clots, and that can lead to stroke. So anything that can lead to stroke, like smoking also affects the interior of the blood vessels. It makes it rough, and then it's predisposed to blood clots.
From what you have said,
Yes.
once there's a blockage or there's a disruption in the blood vessels and all of that, can it be rectified?
Yes, yes. If stroke has already happened, for the ischemic stroke, yes, if the patient present to the hospital early. So we have the golden hour. Within an hour, if a patient is paralyzed because of blockage of blood vessel in the brain, and a CT scan is done within that hour, we can give thrombolytic agents, some medications that can dissolve the clot. The man can walk away from the hospital the next hour or within 12 hours as though nothing happened. But if that golden time is lost and you bring the patient, so the damage has been done, so most likely it's going to be permanent. So stroke is time, especially for the ischemic stroke. A lot of time, something can be done about relieving the blockage. But for the hemorrhagic stroke, their fate is sealed. There's not much that can be done about that.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Otabo. Now let's get to Maiduguri now, where we have Dr. Gadzama, and we have been told that the hypertension, diabetes, and high cholesterol are the contributory factor, for the having stroke. What about the issue of what does lifestyle, play in when it comes to stroke? Our lifestyle. Some people say, the sedentary lifestyle, or the habit. How does it, contribute to having stroke?
Very much, yes. Lifestyle affects stroke in a varieties of ways. I listened to my colleagues talking about the other risk factors. Some of these risk factors are not too common in Nigeria. There's this study, a SEREN study, a robust study that was done to look at the risk factors of stroke in Nigeria and Ghana. In fact, 15 states in Nigeria were involved in that study. And they identified 11 risk factors that are responsible for 98.2% of stroke in West Africa. Besides what my colleagues have just said, there are other factors like regular consumption of red meat has been identified as a major risk factor for stroke in West Africa. Added salt, low green leafy vegetable consumption has also been identified as a major risk factor in Africa, in West Africa. So these are some of the important risk factors besides what they have listed. I said 11 of them. And in decreasing order of frequency is just the hypertension that I have said. In these studies that have increased our understanding of risk factors, some of these risk factors are consistent through the various studies, whether in West Africa or in other African countries or in the world. But the hypertension still remains the most common cause of hypertension in Nigeria and in West Africa, followed by regular consumption of meat, followed by dyslipidemia. Those I said, abnormal lipid, the bad ones. We have good lipids, we have bad lipids. So accumulation of the bad lipids, maybe from our dietary attitude, is responsible for stroke also. Then you have this obesity, westernization of our diet is also a major risk factor. Then the fifth major one is the diabetes mellitus, just as I said. Then the other ones are the current cigarette smoking, stress is also a risk factor. It has been identified as a major modifiable risk factor. Because when you're talking about risk factors of stroke, there are factors that we cannot do anything about, like age. It is known that as the age increases, the risk of stroke increases, especially after the age of 55. The risk doubles after every 10 years. The another factors that we cannot do anything about is gender. Stroke has been shown to be higher in males than female. Then race, it's said to be higher and more severe in the black race. Then family hereditary factors. For one reason or the other, some families have stroke, maybe because of changes in their genetic makeup. And then family history of stroke. So these are non-modifiable risk factors, things that we cannot do anything about. But for us, we need to pay more attention to the modifiable risk factors, things that we can modify. As you can see, hypertension is something we can do something about. Diabetes mellitus is something we can do things about. Diet is something we can do something about. Our physical inactivity is something we can do. Cigarette smoking is something we can do something about, and as well as alcohol consumption. So these are modifiable risk factors. So it is very crucial to consider these factors in developing an effective preventive mechanism that will reduce the burden of stroke in Nigeria. And it is not just better, but it's cheaper. So this is what I can say about the lifestyle modification. If somebody has some of these vascular risk factors, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and diabetes mellitus, all you need to do is control the hypertension, control the blood glucose, and give in statins. And it doesn't cost much. But if somebody has stroke, just like he said, if you have an ischemic stroke, a stroke that results from blockage of the blood vessels, that medication you say you give to go and dissolve it, one of them, Alteplase, is about 1.something million naira. So you can see it's very expensive. Or the Tenecplase is about 600 and something thousand naira. Or are you talking of Neuro 8, which is about, you take for 6 months. The minimum for 1 month is more than 600,000. So it has a huge financial burden on the family members and even the community. So it's a very serious matter, just as suggested by the global health, global disease burden. What I said is the leading cause of death besides cardiovascular condition, and the most common cause of adult long-time disability. 18 million people are affected globally annually. 6 million die from stroke. 6 million remain permanently disabled, and 6 million recover. So it's a serious matter. That's why the World Stroke Organization declared stroke as a public health emergency when they started celebrating this World Stroke Day. Thank you.
Statistics. We'll come back to you, but let's get back here in the studio. Dr. Tabo, Dr. Gadzama raised some, very important points that I'd like you to, speak about. He talked about the fact that more men are affected than women. What's responsible for that? And then could you also tell us, he talked about the world statistics, 6 million die, 6 million remain, in that condition forever, and only 6 million recover. What is the statistics for Nigeria?
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're not, I tried to do my research, but we can't really say exactly how many people die from stroke in Nigeria. I saw the statistics in the US. 800,000 people get stroke in the United States in a year, and about 150,000 people die. We can't even know because we don't even do autopsies. Many of the people that die from stroke, you hear people they slept and they didn't wake up. They may have suffered a massive stroke, and because not many people survive stroke to get to the hospital. For the massive stroke, they die at home, or someone is giving a speech and he collapses. And before they rush him to the hospital, he's dead. It could either be a cardiac arrest or a stroke. Or we can say either a brain attack or a heart attack. Because they are almost the same mechanism of action. So we don't have the statistics, but we know that our figures are higher in this environment than in the Western world. If the Western world can be this high, if 150,000 people will die from stroke in a population of 300 and maybe 320 million people, you can imagine how many would die in our environment of 200 and something million people, when our incidence is far higher than the incidence, in the West. So it's scandalous. It's not something we should joke about. It's something that, and I'm happy that, you are bringing up this discussion so that people can be aware of it. A lot of Nigerians are living in denial. And I think it's socio-cultural factors. They think that it can never be them. When you tell an average Nigerian person you have hypertension, he will say, no, it's my enemy that has hypertension. So if that person is living in denial, he cannot do something about the hypertension. And then one day he tries to wake to stand up, he discovers that half of the body is paralyzed. And that's the beginning. Over 40% of people that suffer stroke will die within the first 30 days in Nigeria. At least that study was done in Nigeria. And we have numerous numbers of people. I'm even scared to think about the figures. They are humongous. For the question of male, female that you talked about, yes, males are more predisposed to stroke than female. Because if you look at the risk factors, more men will smoke than women. I think fewer women smoke. That one should be a rule of thumb thing. 2, stress. Stroke, one of the causative factors of stroke is stress. Men are saddled with the responsibility of catering for their families, and so they undergo more stress. And stress leads to production of stress hormones that stresses the body, and it can also predispose to stroke. If there's no money in the house, it's the man that would be thinking about it, you know. So, and that can lead to blood pressure.
Not in all cases, though.
In most cases, and that can lead to high blood pressure. That, you know, the social stressors tend to stress men more than women. So we're not surprised that the incidence of stroke is higher in men than in women, both in terms of lifestyle, alcohol intake, smoking, high blood pressure, and so on and so forth. So the statistics stands to reason.
The statistic is very scary, what you have just said this morning, because, I mean, from all what you have said and the other guests, it's like one needs to be careful about the lifestyle. Now, we're being told that our Zoom guest from Yenogua is now ready. Professor Yaya Obiabo, consultant neurologist, Federal Medical Center, Yenogua, Bayelsa. Professor Obiabo, you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. Okay, we'll get back to the professor, but let's go back to Dr. Mansour Ramalan in Kano. Dr. Ramalan, we know we talked about the risk factors of the stroke, and it's a bit scary. And Dr. Tabo here is talking about the need to create awareness, you know, for preventive measures. So how can community-based initiatives promote stroke awareness and prevention?
Thank you very much. Like my senior colleague has mentioned, the need for community awareness is very important. And I give you an example. We looked at the data of mortality from patients who had stroke, and we found that quite a number of them die because they aspirate, because the relatives try to feed them within the immediate period after they have developed this stroke. And we know from the data that was shared by my friend, Dr. Musa Gadzama, about a third of these patients will die from the stroke. Only a third end up recovering, while a third will continue with some disability. So sometimes people need to be aware not only about the preventive measures, but what they do to take care of these patients that have had this incident, so that, one, they don't develop this stroke again. Because if you look at the data again, you find that any person who has had a stroke is at higher risk of developing another stroke. So compared to somebody who has not had a stroke, the person who had stroke has higher chances of another stroke, a risk stroke. So therefore, it's also important for people to be educated, to know how to handle these people who have this incident. Now, I've mentioned the issue of long-term outcome in terms of what we do, how it affects the mortality of the patients with stroke, and also what we do to prevent them again from prevent those who have had stroke from having another stroke. And generally, for people to know certain things that make them to be at higher risk of developing these strokes, like the lifestyle measures we talked about. People are encouraged to increase their activity and exercise levels because we are getting more and more sedentary with our lifestyle and activities. And then things like cigarette cessations program and so on and so forth. For the major risk factors like hypertension, concerted efforts have to be made from the community to public awareness, advocacy with regards to maintaining adequate blood pressure, because studies have shown that as little as 2 millimeter mercury reduction in systolic blood pressure can reduce the incidence of stroke by up to about 25%. So the more we get more people to have better blood pressure control, the more likely we will reduce the number of people who are likely to develop stroke. Because when we talk about the modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors, like my colleague mentioned, we know that addressing the modifiable risk factors can reduce the incidence of stroke by almost up to 2/3 of whatever numbers we are seeing. So if we make concerted effort to get people to have as good blood pressure, as near normal blood pressure as possible, is also very important. That involves advocacy, medications, emphasizing on the need for people to adhere to their medications, because these medications are long-term medications and people have to take them for a very long time. Blood pressure, blood glucose control, we also try as much as possible to get patients who have diabetes to have good blood sugar control. And we should also remember that people who have diabetes are also at risk of developing hypertension. They are at risk of developing lipid problems, abnormalities. So sometimes these things are interwoven. So as long as we try to control one, we may end up also mitigating the other risk factors. So that is why the community-based initiative and awareness is important. And I think it is stressed on the this year's theme for the World Stroke Day that was celebrated on October 29th, and that is more than stroke. That is the theme. So it talks about how community engagement and things, advocacy, and I'm sure that's what the NTA is doing. I've listened to the background report. It was fantastic. And those are the kind of things that we need to push to make people to get the level of awareness, to sustain a consistent level of awareness that is necessary to drive this engagement.
Dr. Ramalan, let's get to Professor Obiabo now, who joins us from Yenagoa, Bayelsa State. Prof, I'm sure you've been following the conversation. Many thanks for joining us. So much has been said already about, what stroke is, the risk factors, and the statistics. It's not a good one, actually. But I want you to tell us about the treatment of stroke. Dr. Otabas talked about different types, Tell us, what is available in the country? Because, there's so many factors. Some say our health sector is ill, or if you like, unhealthy, in terms of personnel, facilities, and all of that. And now we have this major burden, the stroke, which is triggered by so many other factors. In terms of treatment, what is available? Someone already mentioned that it's quite expensive, but of course, be specific now what it takes to manage a patient with stroke in terms of cost. And is there anything, captured in the NHIA, to deal with stroke?
Issue to focus. I'm happy that the World Stroke celebration for this year has helped us to create more awareness, and NTA is anchoring this in a big way. So, recognition of stroke is the most important step in ensuring a good treatment is effected. when a person suddenly develops weakness on one side of the body, slow speech, is not able to talk well again, all of a sudden, you just need to begin to think that stroke may have occurred. So we use this acronym FAST. So it is time to act fast. If there is sudden weakness of the face just turned to one side. Why is my face shifted to one side? You are already having a stroke. It happened suddenly. Your arm just became weak, hand become weak, leg become weak. You might be in a meeting and it can occur. Stroke spares no age and it spares no social class. It can occur anytime. You could be driving and you can be struck by a stroke. Just like stroke can also occur when people wake up from sleep. So the timing of when this thing occurs is important. How many minutes ago did it occur? This is our most important question when the patient is brought to the emergency room. We want a situation where if stroke occurs, such a person should be rushed to the nearest emergency room as soon as possible, because time is brain, time is neuron. The brain says neurons. You need time to salvage them. With every minute that passes by, you are losing millions of these neurons. And so the need to act fast is very important. So the first step is recognize that a stroke has occurred and rush the person to the emergency room. How well our emergency rooms are equipped to manage stroke is the next question. There are several hurdles, and those hurdles range from when to get this patient to the emergency room, the road network to get to the emergency room. Well, before I go further, our people have a lot of beliefs that harm us from bringing patients with stroke to attention. Immediately, most people think is, it has been caused by an attack, a spiritual attack. And they are rushing to spiritual homes. Some are going to pastors to pray first, or go to their imams to pray first. And these are delaying the care. Most of the stroke are caused by a blockade in flow of blood to the brain. So that clot that is flowing in the blood had taken off from the heart, and you need to break that clot immediately. Not when it has turned to a block of bread that once you open up the blood vessel, it will just bleed. So you need to act fast. We have in every major cities in the country now, there's brain CT scans. CT scans must be available in our major hospitals. It's a big challenge, because to decide who has the clot, that we need to give the drug that will lyse the clot. A drug is available that can break that clot that has blocked the flow of blood to the brain. That will cause the magic, that the man who suddenly is not able to talk again or move left or right limbs again can suddenly regain all those functions. But this has to be detected and treatment initiated within 4.5 hours. So the time from when symptoms occur to the arrival to the emergency room and when CT scan need to be done should be shortened. Within an hour, we expect that brain CT scan is supposed to have been done. But can we find CT scans in our hospitals? this is a big challenge. So when people are getting delayed in coming to the care center, it's taking out of the time to care for stroke. And when they have arrived, getting a CT scan is another issue. The essence of this awareness is to ensure that people make it early to the emergency room, and we activate the emergency systems to make sure that the patient gets CT scan done. There are immediate workup tests that need to be done to know who qualified to receive this drug we call recombinant tissue plasminogen activator.
Like trouser
Or
and top.
Where
is it?
Prof, for your opening thoughts there. You've spoken about so many things there, especially the timing of occurrence and how important it is to have an emergency response. Let's go to our Maiduguri studio now, where we have Dr. Musa Joseph Gadzama. Dr. Gadzama, I just want to find out, because of this issue of screening methods of effective for early effective in detecting stroke detection, and how accessible are they in Nigeria? And also, can you discuss the importance of emergency response, in stroke treatment in this country?
Thank you. If I got you well, I didn't hear the importance of screening and then emergency response. Well, screening is very, very important, especially with the high burden of undiagnosed or poorly controlled hypertension. If we want to reduce the burden of stroke in Nigeria, we must find an effective way of screening for hypertension and then effective management for hypertension. Generally, the vascular risk factors are very, very important. The hypertension that we talked about, the dyslipidemia that we talked about, and the diabetes mellitus. These are important vascular risk factors that can be screened for and managed effectively. If you look at other modifiable risk factors, there are lifestyle issues that can be modified by educating the patients, that requires little or no financial implication. So our work as physicians, doctors, is to emphasize on screening for hypertension, dyslipidemia, diabetes mellitus, so that our public health initiatives can focus on these vascular risk factors to reduce the burden of hypertension. Then the emergency response, honestly, I can say it is not too effective. Well, from my own side, probably because we know the issue of stroke, as earlier highlighted, it has a huge financial burden, both on the hospital aspect and the family aspect. For instance, if we cannot prevent stroke by identifying the modifiable risk factors, we in the hospital, we should be able to reduce mortality for those that have gotten the stroke. There are standard guidelines to follow to reduce this mortality. For instance, how many hospitals in Nigeria have stroke center unit? Because evidence has shown that patients that are managed in the stroke unit have reduced mortality, better functional outcome, that's reduced disability outcome. Unfortunately, the coverage of stroke unit in Nigeria is less than 10%. This is a nationwide cross-sectional survey study. The latest stroke center is in Umuahia. Thank God in Maiduguri. In the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to commission the largest stroke center in Africa. This is because so many of our prominent elders have died from stroke. Not because we do not know what to do, but because we do not have the facilities on ground. Ideally, every hospital, tertiary hospitals that mentions that treat stroke should have an ambulance with a dedicated phone line, telephone lines, so that at any place there is stroke, they should be able to call so that arrangement will be made to receive that patient. The emergency rooms are just to stabilize and to do the initial investigation. Ideally, CT should be done within 25 minutes, according to the recommendation. And that intravenous thrombolysis should be commenced within 1 hour, 60 minutes. Unfortunately, most of our patients come when, in fact, those that come early come in the 4th or 5th day when they begin to have complications, cerebral edema. That's when they begin to come to the hospital. At that time, the window period for thrombolysis, which is 9 hours using the extent study, has elapsed. The mechanical thrombectomy, where you go in and bring out the clot, which should be done within 24 hours, has elapsed. So our health-seeking attitude should change, but that can only come through awareness, education, programs like this, where you educate people about the need to come to the hospital immediately. One silent thing that we don't pay attention to is transient ischemic attack. You hear people calling it minor stroke. It is not minor. Most ischemic stroke are preceded by transient ischemic attack. So it's an indicator. So once you have, and unfortunately, a lot of patients have a typical presentation. For instance, you can just come with blindness, because the definition of stroke now is not only brain. No. It's when you have dysfunction of the brain, the eye, or the spinal cord as a result of insufficient blood supply. It's stroke. So some people come with transient symptoms like blindness or isolated speech problem. People will say it's minor stroke. No, such patients should be admitted and evaluated fully, because if they have higher risk factors, treatment has to be aggressive, and you refer them to a neurologist or to a vascular surgeon. So TIA, in trying to reduce the burden of stroke and mortality, any abnormal neurological symptom should be referred to the teaching hospital. Somebody can just come with stroke or present with dizziness, vertigo, confusion. You may think maybe it's something else. No. But it's the work of neurologists to screen this appropriately, use CT imaging. This CT ideally should be done within 7 days, because you want to intervene. After that 7 days, why are you doing CT? You do MRI to look for what? Details of what has happened. But how many of our centers have MRI? And it is cost. It's not, though we in Maiduguri were fortunate, we have it. I think in Maiduguri State Specialist Hospital, we have the cheapest CT and MRI in this country, courtesy of our governor. So stroke, the management of stroke is very, very expensive, both to the hospitals in terms of providing these resources and to the family. Despite all these advances, still the incidence of stroke or prevalent stroke keep increasing to an alarming rate in Africa, especially in Nigeria. Ideally now, stroke should be managed in a stroke unit with dedicated staff and facilities, because studies have shown in Nigeria that most people that have stroke in Nigeria die from complication, just as my colleague just mentioned, that they die from aspiration pneumonia, deep venous thrombosis, name it. So our work in the stroke unit, and they should be managed they should be admitted within the first week of development of the stroke, because you don't stay long in stroke unit. You stabilize you and you send you either to the ward or you send you to the community. So government, the political will should be there to establish stroke unit, at least in every region. The coverage of less than 10% in Nigeria with this high population is discouraging. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gadzama, for your thoughts on that question. I understand that Professor Obiabo is back now. Before the disruption in your connection, you were, giving us your thoughts on a previous question. I'd like you to land on that, but I also want to add to it. Listening to Dr. Gadzama talking about patients presenting to the hospital maybe 4 or 5 days after, they've had a stroke. Of course, it's not entirely the fault of patients if you want to look at it critically. You want to ask how many functional primary healthcare centers do we even have in communities, and then access to centers that have these advanced facilities to deal with stroke. Then the question of qualified personnel in this field, how many are still available in the country? Of course, the jackpot phenomenon is with us. So these are, some of the issues. And then I'd like you to, speak on that. And then, of course, the previous question, I also want you to hit on the NHIA, that's the National Health Insurance Act. Is there anything that covers stroke, considering the cost in managing it?
Thank you very much for the question. I was talking about treatment of stroke, trying to start from the acute response phase, of which most of our patients are unable to meet up because of delayed arrival to the hospital. So one key issue which the recent speaker talked about is the stroke systems of care in Nigeria. We are seriously behind. We need stroke units, stroke center, but unfortunately, even most of our teaching hospitals in Nigeria are what we call stroke-ready hospitals, not up to the standard of stroke units, where all things you need to be put in place in a stroke unit are needed. They fall short of what is called stroke unit. Rather, they meet what we call stroke-ready hospital, where they have the personnel on ground, the neurologists may be there. You have the physicians supporting the neurologists and other teams are available. And there may be CT, but there is no good network of coordination or protocol in place to manage stroke. So this, we need to sensitize and make sure that things are put in proper perspective in those major hospitals that we can call stroke-ready hospitals, so that they can have functional stroke units. Those who are managers of our health system, the policy makers, we are urging them to find means of ensuring that stroke care is appropriately built into healthcare facilities in Nigeria. There is not enough that is in place in the National Health Act for caring for stroke, because the issue of getting a hospital to have CT scan as a mandatory requirement, this is far from what we expect. So we need more holistic effort. Most of our care in Nigeria is supportive care, because patients present late and we're not able to get them to receive that magic drug, which we are calling recombinant tissue plasminogen activator, or tenetplase, which must be given within a short time. And a lot of impediments are on its way if you need to prepare a patient to get that drug. And since we cannot get that, the other thing we need to do is supportive care, because most of our patients are dying from complications of acute stroke. As other speakers have mentioned, the skin care itself, where people lie on one spot and develop bed sores. Bed sores can be a big challenge. People are dying from infections that follow that. The immobility following stroke predispose them to having clots in their veins, what we call DVT, deep vein thrombosis. This can be moved to the lungs, causing pulmonary embolism, blocking veins and arteries in the lungs and causing death. People inhale their saliva and other secretions into the lungs, and from there develop infection, what we call aspiration pneumonia. This follows after stroke. And so when the patient with stroke is brought to the hospital, even if he has passed the initial time of acute care to reverse the deficit, which is within hours, the other thing we need to do is preventing these medical complications from occurring. Now, some of them, what caused the stroke, which the majority of all the patients is hypertension. The severe hypertension can also cause other organ failure. The kidney may fail alongside with the stroke that is occurring. Also, the heart may also be attacked. At the same time, the brain is attacked. So you need to care for all this holistically and to make sure the patient is revived, resuscitated. So this underscores the fact that all stroke patients must be brought to the hospital. We have challenge of personnel. We are training neurologists. They are not enough in the country, and a lot of them are leaving the country in droves. If you are practicing as a neurologist in a center where there is no CT scan, no MRI, the practice becomes uninteresting because you see patients, you cannot make diagnosis of stroke. Did this one have the hemorrhagic stroke or is ischemic stroke? You cannot tell. You are only doing conservative care. There are some things you want to give the patient. You are just being careful because you don't know the type of stroke. So these are the things that we want to make sure that government pay proper attention and give more room to caring for stroke. Caring for stroke is not just stroke alone. There are other medical comorbidities alongside. As you make care for stroke viable, you are also making care for other medical conditions viable alongside. So it is critical that we should work on this. So the patient with stroke requires investigating for what caused the stroke, investigating for complications that has already arisen following the stroke. And all these need a multidisciplinary care. The neurologist is there as a coordinator for the team of care, but you need other personnel. The nurses are important, the physiotherapists are important, speech therapists, we lack them heavily in the country. Occupational therapists, we don't have them now. So when all these are required and they are not available, it makes the care of stroke very difficult. And my own contribution at this hour is that we are using this medium to call on all the actors in the health sector to pay critical attention to care for stroke. Because what it needs to care for them, we may have, but they are very limited. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your contribution there. We need to pay more critical attention to care for stroke. When we come back, we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll look at the treatment and rehabilitation of a stroke in the country. Then we'll go to Kano when we come back. So stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. You're still on to Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. And our discussion today is still on the reducing the risk of stroke in the country. Before we went on break, we had a lot of discussion on the causes of strokes, the risk factors, and we're talking about the treatment. So we'll go to our Kano studio now, where we have Dr. Mansour Ramalan. Dr. Mansour, I want you to just tell us what are the current treatment options for stroke patients we have in the country right now, and what advancements are on the horizon before we look at the rehabilitation or and services, for the patients?
Thank you very much. For the treatment options that are available for our patients include, in some centers in Nigeria, really, we have the ability to give them some of those intervention procedures my colleague mentioned. And there are facilities in some places to give them antiplatelets, because we said those that have ischemic stroke and they present early within the time that is available, they can get antiplatelet therapy. But for most of the patients, it's still limited to traditional treatment of blood pressure, blood glucose, and lipids treatment. And to also reiterate the fact that my colleague also mentioned the fact that we have very, very few stroke units in the country. So our treatment options are not too good compared to what is expected. However, I also must say that, of course, we have a few places where we can have some of those advanced therapy for some patients. Importantly, I also have to say that it's actually very, very expensive to get patients to get some of those advanced treatment options that are available. The cost is quite high. In terms of rehabilitation, the treatment also involves rehabilitation for those who have actually developed stroke. And even for those who have developed stroke, we will still want to control their risk factors. I mean, to have them get very good blood pressure control, to have them get very good blood glucose control if they have diabetes or hyperglycemia, and also to give them some medications that help to stabilize their blood, prevent blood clotting, which are the antiplatelets drugs. And they also get some drugs to manage their blood cholesterol level, those anti-lipids agent, primarily the statins. So for those who have had the stroke, that is being done to them. And rehabilitation is done to get them to be able to live near normal lives as possible, using sometimes they have to be provided with some aids, speech therapy, and so on. Those are some of the things that are done for them. Again, these things are not available at almost every centers, because I know some places we have some few speech therapies, that help to manage this patient. But I also know in many places these things are not available. So these are part of the challenges that these patients experience due to the nature of our own system. For good reasons, it has been mentioned here, and I would like to emphasize that there is need to also increase the level of awareness and education, is for the fact that people need to understand what this disease is, how patients present, because sometimes people keep their relatives with them for a longer time than necessary before they present to the hospital. And sometimes some of the practices that are being done around the time that patients develop stroke, like trying to feed them with traditional concoctions, could be harmful to the patients. And those are some of the things that actually worsen the outcome of some of those patients that develop this disease condition. So I think programs like this can provide an avenue to educate the people and provide information that is useful, so that people can understand what they need to do when a relation is found in that kind of condition. And that helps the healthcare system as well, because if we reduce the burden of those problems and the complications that can arise from them, we are likely to reduce the stress or the strain on the healthcare system and the burden the system suffers.
Dr. Ramalan, for your response to that question. I'd like to get to Dr. Otabo. Listening to Dr. Ramalan and Dr. Gadzama speak about the treatment options available and the challenges. Of course, you want to come back to your earlier comment about why, some Nigerians would rather seek spiritual help. Because, like already mentioned, in different hospitals, the facilities are not available, the personnel to deal with the whole issue are also not available. So, I mean, it just shows that, there's a vacuum somewhere. But, speaking on stroke, I want you to tell us, is there a relationship between Bell's palsy and stroke, considering the fact that there are similarities in the outlook?
Okay, thank you. Well, Bell's palsy is just a focal neurological deficit. It's not as a result of the cut of blood supply to any part of the brain, but the nerve itself is being affected by a viral infection. So that's not, sometimes they appear similar a bit, but the causative factors are different. Now, coming back to the management of stroke, I know that there are challenges, when it comes to managing stroke because of the level of development of the country and the availabilities of facilities. But once stroke has happened, we should try to make the best out of a bad situation. And though my colleagues have rightly blamed the patient for not coming on time, but we also, some health facilities also have some blame. I have seen where patients presented early, but they didn't get the right attention that they needed. Either because the hospital that knows well that they can't manage the case, they just want to keep the patient for 1 or 2 days so they can just have the patient then before they kick the can down the road. Or even patients that go for CT scan. Sometimes the CT scan report is not ready until after 48 hours. It's useless. What's the use? I want to tell Nigerians, if your relative have these symptoms that we say and we suspect it to be stroke, think of the place where you can get a CT scan service quickly. And if anybody is telling you, come back tomorrow, tell them no. There must be someone who can look at the CT scan and say, there's something here, let's do something about it. Because in many centers, they may be very busy, and they can say, come back tomorrow, come back in 2 days. Maybe you are doing the scan today, Friday. They'll say, come on Monday for the report. By Monday, it will be useless. Insist. This is an avenue to let you know that you have the right to insist, that you want to know what the report of the CT scan is saying. Even if it's not a full report, a preliminary report, someone should peep into that CT scan and see what is there. In my center, you can do an emergency CT scan in 10 minutes upon arrival. Yes. And we don't have downtime. You do it.
That's commercial, sir.
Yeah, no, no. I'm just telling you the standard. That's the standard of care. And all the facilities, all the specialists are there. And they will have the same thing in many centers. So this is one lesson that people must
What is the
take
cost
away.
like?
CT scan is somewhere around 70,000 naira per scan. Some people's problem is not the money. Yeah. It's just that they need to know where the pitfalls are. You need to know when you are being mismanaged so that you can, ask for your right. That's one. Then the second point I want to take, this might be my parting shot, I don't know if I have another time. When a patient already has a stroke, if he survives it, that patient is at risk of having another stroke because the risk factor is still there. So the patient should be cared for as though stroke is about to happen, and they must do everything to prevent it, because a second stroke is usually more fatal. It's like when you have a plane going with 2 engines. If the plane loses one engine, the pilot can manage to glide until he lands. If the second engine is lost, there's actually no hope for that.
So what's the essence of rehabilitation then?
No, rehabilitation is just to try to bring back some of the functions that have been lost. Okay, maybe the man is still managing to, walk. Maybe if the muscle power initially was 0/5, now is now getting to 2/5. Yeah. The brain is trying to recover itself. Some of the neurons are, the remaining neurons are trying to make up for the ones that have been lost. So that's the rehabilitation process. But if in that process you now get another hit, then a lot of people don't survive the second.
You talked about care
Yes.
after a first stroke.
Yes.
You manage the patient like a stroke is about to happen. What is that care about? What is it about? What they eat? How?
Controlling the blood pressure, all the risk factors of stroke that we have talked about today, making sure that you minimize those risk factors. If the man was smoking, he should stop smoking. If he's having high blood pressure, his blood pressure can never be above normal range. If he's diabetic must be controlled. If they give him antiplatelet medications like those blood thinners, he must take them regularly. If he was not exercising, he must begin to exercise. His diet must be in focus. He must take a lot of leafy vegetables, fruits, and avoid too much red meat. Those are the things that they must focus on to ensure that it doesn't happen
One
again.
of the doctors spoke about hereditary being a risk factor.
Well, the hereditary, yes, there are some families that have family history of stroke. But those family history of stroke is still as a result of family history of hypertension, family history of diabetes, and family history of hypercholesterolemia. So when you have a patient with stroke and you have one or two family members, you are going to be looking out for what were the predisposing factors to this stroke that is in the family. If you take care of those things, you can still mitigate stroke in other members of the family.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Otaba. Now let's go to our Maiduguri studio where we have Dr. Gadzama. Yeah, earlier on, Prof talked about the issue of policy. How can healthcare policy change our policies, or maybe policy changes address stroke prevention in the country? Do we need to strengthen it or strengthen them?
There's need to strengthen health policy. First of all, government should have the political will, because stroke comes with huge financial burden. Like especially the investigative procedures, the neuroimaging, they are very expensive. I think they should be included in the National Health Insurance Scheme. And regions should have stroke centers. We have been talking about medical aspect of treating stroke. Completely we didn't say anything about neurosurgeons. They are important. That's why you need to have a stroke center where you have a neurosurgeons. If the stroke, there are some strokes, especially when the blood vessel ruptures, the hemorrhagic type, it's the neurosurgeons that treat it. All they do is just open the brain and evacuate the clot, and you see patient will recover immediately. So stroke centers should be spread across the regions, at least with modern facilities for appropriate intervention. Some of these medications, because after making the diagnosis, if the patient comes within the stipulated time, they are very expensive. As I said, in Lagos, Artiplace is 1.something million. Tenecteplase is over 600,000. Neuro 8, you take it for 6 months. For 1 month, is over 600,000. So for us, especially here, we have to consider the affordability. They are not even available readily because people don't prescribe them, people don't afford them. So government need to look at these things so that they can subsidize some of this medication if we really want to reduce the burden of death, mortality due to stroke, and improve functional outcome. And more centers, as I said, should be equipped with neurosurgical equipment. Most of the centers, some states virtually may not even have a neurosurgeons. So what will you do if you have a hemorrhagic stroke, or if you have a large infarct, malignant cerebral edema? That's infarction, very large with accumulation of fluid all around. You need to do what? Drain it. So it's not just medical. Medical is basically for what? Occlusion of blood vessels. But those blood vessels that have ruptured, the neurosurgeons is their work. So, but in conjunction with other allied health workers, just as we say, it's a multidisciplinary approach. The management of stroke is taxing, and it's associated with huge financial burden, both to the government in terms of providing the appropriate facilities after diagnosing, the appropriate medication. Medications are very expensive. So the government, the will should be there to strategize on how to, if possible, make even screening. In some places, when you go to measure blood pressure in some center, you have to pay. It should be free. People should be trained, especially to man the stroke center, where you have advanced equipment. You need to be trained. Training should be emphasized, retraining and training. These are things that I think the strategies that will reduce the burden, identification of stroke, the vascular risk factors. People should be trained about that. Then diagnostic facilities should be available, if not in all the hospitals, but across the regions. Then medication to intervene. This newer medication, because in treating stroke, you have to look at the passenger, that's the blood. The blood thinners, they are very expensive. Tenecteplase, alteplase. Basically now we only give antiplatelet, vasoplin or clopidogrel. Then you have to look at the passage, that's the blood vessels. Those atherosclerosis, that's the deposition of fat. You give statins. That one, they are not expensive. So you give those ones. But if there are large blood vessels that are involved, the neurosurgeons have to come in. Then the power, the brain, you have to give things to stimulate rewiring of the brain. These drugs are expensive. That's when you use the neuro aid. You need things like Tocovid. So many acetylcholine. These things are very expensive. Then you now reduce what? Pressure. Because of the blockage, you have ischemic changes or hemorrhage. You have raised intracranial pressure. So you must give drugs that will reduce that raised intracranial pressure. Because one of the major causes of mortality in our patient, cerebral edema, it can cause scorning. Then you must prevent complication. You identify and prevent. That first 1 week of treatment in the stroke center is to support the patient and prevent complication. When you're talking of rehabilitation, you're not talking of the chronic state where you want to take care of the chronic complications. And lastly, you have to prevent reoccurrence, which is very important. So the fact that you've managed a stroke patient, you've discharged him, you must place that person on preventive drugs. And what are they? The antiplatelet for those that have ischemic stroke, and lipid lowering agents, because apart from lowering the lipid, they stabilize plaques so that they don't get dislodged and predispose you to another stroke. If it's hypertensive, you add antihypertensive. If it's diabetic, you add appropriate, or you refer to the endocrinologist to manage. So these are the stages of managing patients. So you can see with the present economic situation, an individual cannot do it. The government really have to come to support if we want to reduce the burden of stroke in terms of mortality, morbidity, and financial implication in this country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gadzama. Because of time, thank you for your comments. Let's get to Professor Obiabo now to, let us know his final comments. What will be your advice to patients, to Nigerians in general, and of course, government, just in 60 seconds.
Important issue about the options of care. All patients with acute stroke need rehydration.
That connection is not as clear as we wanted. So let's get to Dr. Mansour Ramalan now. Your final words as we round up the conversation.
Thank you very much. On the final note, I want to use this medium to appeal to the government to assist in helping to create necessary awareness to the patients, and also to support the system, the healthcare system, in establishing some of these stroke units and centers with some of the high-tech equipment. And finally, for the National Health Insurance Agency to also chip in to intervene and make some of these medications a bit more affordable and accessible to patients. Thank you.
Dr. Mansour Ramalan, consultant physician, diabetologist, and endocrinologist, and first vice president, Diabetes Association of Nigeria, and vice president, Association of Clinical Endocrinologists of Nigeria. Also chairman, Non-Communicable Diseases Committee of the Nigerian Medical Association. It was a pleasure to have you on the program. Many thanks for joining us. All right. We also want to appreciate Professor Yahaya Obiabo, consultant neurologist, Federal Medical Center, Yenagwa, Bayelsa State. Thank you for joining us for the conversation. And of course, Dr. Musa Joseph Gadzama, consultant neurologist, University of Maiduguri Teaching Hospital. It was a pleasure to have you join us. Finally, of course, very importantly, Dr. Christopher Otabo, orthopedic surgeon and MD, Alliance Hospital. Many thanks for being our guest again today. We appreciate you.
Yuri, I think you have to, it's advised that women should take it easy on men to reduce the stroke. So, so
I think it's both ways. I think it's both ways.
Take it easy
Men
on
take it
us.
easy on women, and women take it easy on men.
Just take it as us. The pressure is much, so let's just reduce that pressure. Well, that's Good Morning Nigeria today. We thank you for joining us. I am Ademola Adeoye.
I'm Yanwe John. Take care of your health.